Hey guys, OgreBarberian here, and I wanted to bring you a deck tech for a commander, Balthor the Defiled, one of my favorite commanders I've ever built, and my current, top deck. Uh, he's 2/2 black for a zombie dwarf, 2/2, gives all minions +1/+1, but that's not really relevant to what he does. His main ability is pay 3 black, exile Balthor. Each player returns all black and red creatures from the graveyard to the battlefield. And this is why I like using him. It's a mass reanimation strategy. And since you're mono black, since it's commander, all of your creatures are going to come back to the battlefield all at the same time. So you get a lot of shenanigans going on. I mean, yes, your opponents do get some value out of the deck, out of him activating, but at the same time, you're the one who wants to do it, so they're not getting anywhere near as much value out of it as you are. Your deck is designed around sacrificing your creatures, reusing their abilities over and over, because that's what Balthor is good at. Because he's in your command zone, he's just going to cost a little bit more, but he's always going to be available for you to continuously reanimate your entire graveyard, which is very easy to fill up, mind you, with this deck. So, without further ado, here's the deck tech. As with all things, you gotta start with the basics. And by that I mean basic lands. We've got 21 basic swamps. It's pretty straightforward here. So, then I'll get into our non-basic lands, and then we'll get into the rest of the deck. So, like any good black player, you gotta have an Urborg Tomb of Yawgmoth, because everything needs to be a swamp, right? Well, the main reason for that is because we have 14 non-basic lands, so it's actually more to make your non-basic lands into swamps as well. For this card that goes with it is that Cabal Coffers. Everybody knows Cabal Coffers if they've seen Magic and seen black in any length of time. You pay 2 and you tap it and you add black to your mana pool for each swamp you control. So obviously you want to have the Urborg out if you're going to use the Coffers and you have, more than 1 or 2 non-basic lands. And odds are you probably will because you're going to at least have the Coffers. And then we got Thespian Stage. You pay 2, tap it, and it becomes a copy and it retains the ability to copy things as well. So this is going to be your secondary copy of Cabal Coffers, and then Vesuva comes into play and it becomes a copy of another land. So this is actually your second or third copy of Cabal Coffers, but it can also be used to copy other lands as well. Sometimes you're going to want to copy a Strip Mine, or somebody might have out, something really powerful, so it can just copy any land. So that's really nice. This one is Deserted Temple, and it taps to add 1 colorless to your mana pool, or you can pay 1 and tap it to untap target land, which is very important when you have multiple Cabal Coffers. This basically gives you an extra Cabal Coffer out of it. It's one of them that I will search up later on, not necessarily early, but it does help increase your mana additionally. It also works really nicely with Nykthos, Shrine to Nyx, because this is a mono-black deck. You're basically playing mono-black Devotion in Commander, so you're going to have plenty of Devotion for it. So being able to untap this also is very nice. And then because we are a graveyard strategy, we've got Crypt of Agadeem. Pay 2, tap, add black to your mana pool for each black creature card in your graveyard. So obviously, we're mono black, all our creatures are black, except for the couple of artifact creatures, which I actually think I might have 0 in at the moment. So I don't think I have Triskelion or Walking Ballista in right now. But they are options. And then of course we just got some straightforward, Ancient Tomb. Add 2 to your mana pool and take 2 damage. Mana ramping is kind of a big deal in this deck because it is a very big mana deck, as you'll see when we get into how the deck functions. Then we have Phyrexian Tower, where you can sack a creature to add 2 black to your mana pool, or add a colorless. And then we have Lake of the Dead. When it comes into play, you have to sacrifice a swamp, or sacrifice Lake of the Dead. And then it taps for black, or you can tap it and sacrifice a swamp to add 4 black to your mana pool. We don't really mind doing that. We like the big mana. We need big mana. And we got good old Strip Mine, because being able to get rid of pesky things is important. So you've got to have a way to deal with like Glacial Chasm or something. Bojuka Bog, obviously we're in black, we're going to run a Bojuka Bog, because why not? And then a couple of other lands that I like running personally. They're not for everybody, but I like running them. Arch of Rozka, if you can ascend, you can pay 5, tap it, and draw a card. Which, honestly, let's be honest, 10 permanents in Commander is not difficult at all. Most of those are going to be land for that matter. And then, of course, Detection Tower. Being able to target your opponents and their creatures is sometimes important. Not always, but sometimes it's necessary if they have a bunch of hexproof stuff or they like running, stuff like that. All right, and then we have 7 categories of the deck. We have your win con, and then we have mana, we have draw, we have tutors, we have recursion, I do believe, sack outlets, and the last one is our removal. We'll go through each one of those, and that's why they're separated out like that, because I find it easier to look at a deck when you know what you're looking at. So our win cons, obviously we're going to be sacrificing our creatures a lot, so we've got Blood Artist. Good old whenever another creature dies, you get to have target player lose 1 life and you gain 1 life. And then we've got Zulaport Cutthroat, same thing, except that each opponent loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. And then we have Mogus's Marauder. Again, I said this is kind of a Black Devotion deck, so being able to give all your creatures haste after Balthor reanimates them is pretty important, and he does that equal to your devotion. So you're pretty much going to have every creature you control is going to have haste for the most part. There's one other win con that could actually alter with. But they also gain, Intimidate, which is interesting because that means they can't be blocked by non-black creatures. And then we have Falkenrath Noble, which is another Blood Artist, essentially, but he's a 4-mana 2/2 flyer instead. So, we're going to have our creature die, so let's make use of that. And, of course, as I said, this is a mono Black Devotion deck, so good old Gary got to make an appearance. Got to drain that life from your opponents so that you can stay alive. And we do use our life as a resource in this deck, so you do want to be able to gain back some of that. And that's why all these options for the win cons have a lot of drain aspect. We want to slowly kill our opponents, but we're going to stay alive in the process. And then our final win con card is Abhorrent Overlord, a 7-mana 6/6 flyer. But when he enters the battlefield, you get a 1/1 flying Harpy token for your devotion to black. So you can get a lot of Harpies that way. And then we have our mana component. And because this is a mass reanimator strategy, we're going to use these little creatures like Blood Pet that are basically just batteries. They come in, you can leave them as a creature, or you can just sacrifice them for some mana. Blood Pet you can sack for 1 black mana. Soul to Viadna, you can tap it and sacrifice a black or artifact creature to add black to your mana pool equal to that casting cost, which is pretty important. We do have some things that are fairly large, so getting this off for 5 to 8 isn't really that hard, especially when you're just mass reanimating everything. You give it haste, you can tap it, immediately generate another, 5 to 8 mana. It's pretty cool. So it's a good early play. Then we have Blood Vessel, very similar to Blood Pet, but instead of 1 mana for 1 black, you get 3 mana to play a 2/2 Thrall that gives you 2 black mana. So he's pretty cool though. And then we have Overeager Apprentice, where we can discard a card and sacrifice him to add 3 black to our mana pool. We do like adding mana to our pool, and we do like discarding cards because that's how we get them back into play. Because Balthor is 3 black to activate, just so happens. Also, this puts a card into our graveyard that we probably want to reanimate with Balthor. And we'll also get back the Overeager Apprentice when we activate Balthor. And then we have Pawn of Ulamog, a good old 3-mana Pawn of Ulamog, who, whenever him or another creature dies, you get another non-token creature dies, you get to create a 0/1 colorless Eldrazi spawn that has sacrifice it to add a colorless to your mana pool. This is a great way to increase your mana count as you're sacrificing your creatures. So, and it also increases your body count because you're adding a spawn token that's a creature, so you can add more bodies to the Zulaport Cutthroat and the Blood Artist and whatnot. Then we have Priest of Gix, 3 mana for a 2/1, but when he enters the battlefield, you get 3 black 2 mana pool. It doesn't really matter that when he enters because we want to generate a lot of mana when Balthor and when we reanimate. Usually when we're reanimating, we're doing it multiple times at a turn. And then we have Basil Sliver, who is pretty much the same as the other one. He's 3 mana for a 2/2, and then you can sack for 2 black. And he's the only Sliver in the deck, so it doesn't really relevant. And then, of course, good old Cryptghast, 4 mana for a 2/2. Whenever you tap a swamp for mana, add black to your mana pool. Also has Extort. Not that I use the Extort a whole lot. And no, just if you're wondering, the white part of that mana symbol is a reminder text, and therefore is not considered outside of color identity as far as commander is concerned. So he has a legal card for mono black. Then we have a newer edition, Pitiless Plunderer, 4 mana for a 1/4 pirate. Whenever another creature you control dies, notice that this just says another creature, so it does count the spawn tokens, so it does allow you to double up on their mana, because you can sacrifice them, and then he'll generate a treasure token whenever another creature dies. And obviously he doesn't count himself, so that's the one downside. But he does let you double up on your spawn tokens and your harpy tokens. They can start generating you mana as well. So this can be really powerful if you have the right setup. And remember how I was saying we like to discard cards every now and again? Well, Scourge Familiar lets you discard a card to add a black to your mana pool. And he's a 3/2 flyer on top of that for 5 mana. I'm not really worried about that 5 mana because usually we want to put him into our graveyard or cheat him out with our other mana creatures where we're sacrificing them for mana to get him out as quickly as possible. This is one of your primary cards as far as the engine of the deck is concerned. So yeah, you want to have him. He's definitely a really good card, just to help, get you where you need to go. So, and then we have additional mana stuff. We have Mana Crypt. And obviously, I'm going to just say this now as a disclaimer. I do have a lot of cards that are a little bit pricey as far as it is, I understand not everybody is going to have a lot of these cards, and that's okay. You don't need to have all the most expensive cards, in the world. You don't need to have any of that stuff necessarily. This is just what I use because I have it. If your play group doesn't have, powerful cards like this, don't worry about it. It's not a big deal. It's not a mandatory card in the deck. And you'll see that throughout the deck. There's a lot of expensive cards in this deck just because I've had it for years. But don't think that the deck itself is going to be expensive if you try to build it. The core of the deck, I priced it out, and as the time of this recording, it was right around $25 for the core of the deck. And I'll go into all of that here in a little bit too. So, but Mana Crypt, 0 mana, add 2 mana to your pool. Good old Soul Ring, gotta have Soul Ring, obviously. Mana Vault, 1, tap to add 3, and then you can pay 4 to untap it, otherwise take a damage during your upkeep. Expedition Map, because we need to find that Cabal Coffers. It is very important for us to find Cabal Coffers. If we have Coffers, but not Urborg, we go find Urborg. If we have both of those, we go find Thespian Stage, or Vesuva, or Deserted Temple. And then Grim Monolith, 2 mana, tap to add 3, pay 4 to untap it, and again, you don't necessarily need it. Then we have Jet Medallion, 2 mana for an artifact that reduces the cost by 1 for all black spells that you cast. So, very powerful because all of our spells are black for the most part. Mirage Mirror, 3 mana for an artifact. You pay 2, tap, have Mirage Mirror become a copy of target artifact, creature, enchantment, or land. So this can be yet an additional Cabal Coffers. It could be another Jet Medallion. It could be a lot of things. It's a very, very good card. Do not underestimate this card. It is very powerful. And if your opponent happens to have something that you really like and want to copy, it can do that too. Good old straightforward Dark Ritual, because some of our stuff is expensive and we just need the extra mana, and sometimes we can go off just that much faster because we'll hit 5 mana, play Balthor, activate Balthor with the Dark Ritual, and just start going nuts. Songs the Damned. 1 black to add black to your mana pool for each creature in your graveyard. Again, we like to have additional mana because this is a big mana deck. Cabal Ritual is 2 mana to add 3 to your pool. Otherwise, if you have Threshold, which is 7 cards in your graveyard, you get to add 5 black to your pool. We like mana. We like mana a lot, so much so that that was the largest portion of this deck. And then we have good old Heartless Summoning. 2 mana for an enchantment that creature spells cost 2 less to cast, but creatures you control get -1/-1 as well. So do keep in mind this does kill off some of your creatures, does kill off your Harpy tokens, does kill off your Spawn tokens. Some of your other creatures aren't going to survive, like your Blood Artist and Zilliper Cutthroat. Balthor himself is a 2/2, and some of the other really important ones do actually have 2 toughness. So it's not going to kill off all the most important stuff, and you'll notice that we'll start getting into some really big stuff as well. So it's a very, very good card just to accelerate you that extra 2 mana on everything. Sometimes it's needed. And this is a really, really powerful one, and there's even a way around this one. You don't necessarily need this one. I'm going to include it in the combo, but there is ways around this one as well. But Phyrexian Altar, 3 mana, you can sacrifice a creature to add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool. We like sacrificing our stuff, we like killing our stuff. This is one of our primary ways to do so, and because it generates mana. And we love to generate mana in this deck, and we like to use a lot of mana. It's not uncommon for this deck to use 30-40 mana in turn when it decides to win. And then, of course, Ashnod's Altar. Very similar to Phyrexian Altar, but it's going to add colorless instead of colored mana to your pool. What I was referring to earlier about getting around Phyrexian Altar, you can actually use Ashnod's Altar along with a card called Bog Initiate. Bog Initiate's a 2 mana 1/1. You can pay 1 and convert it into black. So that's the way around it. So it's pretty cool. If you need to go on a budget, that's definitely a good one to pick up, is Bog Initiate. Excuse me. And then we're going to get into our draw engines. So Dusk Legion Zealot, 2 mana. When it enters the battlefield, lose 1 and draw a card. 1/1. Phyrexian Rager, same thing. 3 mana for a 2/2. When he comes in, lose 1 and draw a card. Then we have Grim Haruspex, who's a 3 mana, 3/2 with Morph. Not that we really ever morph him, but notice he's a 3/2, so that's kind of important. Whenever another non-token creature you control dies, draw a card. Now, this is important for the combo with Scourge Familiar, and we'll go into that in a little while. Then we have Midnight Reaper, who's a very new card, just came out. But he's very similar to Grim Haruspex. It's whenever another non-token creature dies, deals 1 damage to you, and you draw a card. The other thing that's important about him is he happens to be a zombie. So that's kind of cool. So then we have Disciple of Bolas. Whenever it enters the battlefield, you can sacrifice another creature, and you gain X life and draw X cards, where X is the creature's power. So it's pretty powerful all in itself. 4 mana for a 2/1, not the greatest, but drawing a bunch of cards and gaining a bunch of life is pretty cool, especially when you consider some of our creatures have 6 to 8, power and toughness. So it's pretty good. Smothering Abomination, 4/3. He is the only colorless creature, so he will not get reanimated by Balthor. So just be aware of that. He is not black, he's colorless. But whenever you sacrifice a creature, you have to draw a card. And then at the beginning of your upkeep, you have to sacrifice a creature. So he can get you a lot of cards really quickly because, again, we like to sacrifice our creatures for mana, so he's going to draw you a lot of cards. So he's also a 4/3 flyer, so that's pretty powerful. And then we have Corpse Augur. Whenever Corpse Augur dies, you draw X cards and lose X life, where X is the number of creature cards in target player's graveyard. Most of the time, it's going to be our own graveyard. We run 42 creatures. We're going to have a lot of creatures in our graveyard most of the time because we're going to be sacrificing all of them. So Corpse Augur is going to be one of the last ones we sacrifice just so that we can draw a bunch of cards and then continue to fill our graveyard and go from there. But also, he happens to be a zombie wizard. So, relevant, never know. And then we have another fairly new addition. I've really been liking him, but Krav the Unredeemed, 5 mana for a 3/3 demon, and then you can pay a black, sacrifice X creatures, and then target player draws X cards and gains X life, and then you put X counters on Krav. So it doesn't say other creatures, so he can sacrifice himself to pay for this, which is kind of cool. And then you obviously just target yourself to gain the life and draw the cards. but he can let you sacrifice all of your creatures at one time if you want to just draw a bunch of cards and get a bunch of life. So he's pretty powerful. Then we have Harvester of Souls. Whenever another non-token creature dies, draw a card. Now this, or you may draw a card. So this one is a you may. So the Midnight Reaper is not, and neither is the Grimoire Specs. So just be aware that those two are not you may draws, whereas this one is. So you can deck yourself fairly quickly with this deck. Just be careful. And then we have good old Skull Clamp. +1/-1, and whenever the equipped creature dies, draw 2 for 1 mana to play and 1 mana to equip. So, gotta love Skull Clamp. We have a lot of things that are 1 toughness, and the ones that are 1 toughness want to die, and they do come back fairly easily with Balthor, obviously, or come back on their own right, for that matter. But again, there's a lot of things that won't die to it, but we do have a lot of sack outlets, so that's what we get around that when we draw a bunch of cards. We like to draw cards. But what's better than drawing? Maybe a little bit of tutoring. So, Corpse Connoisseur, 5 mana for a 3/3. Whenever it enters the battlefield, you search your library for a creature card and put that creature into your graveyard, which is exactly where we want it, and he also happens to have Unearth. However, we don't want to use that unless it's like an emergency situation, because we want him to come back when Balthor reanimates everything, and then he'll continue to get us more and more creatures out of our deck. So, very powerful card right there. Then we have Sidisi, the Undead Vizier. 5 mana for a 4/6, Death Touch, and Exploit. Whenever it enters the battlefield and then you exploit, you may search your library for a card, put the card into your hand, and shuffle your library. So, tutor on a stick. Basically, every time Balthor activates, you're going to be able to sacrifice something to Sidisi. May even be yourself. You're going to be able to tutor a card, pretty much any card in your deck. A lot of times it's going to be creatures, but you never know. And then we have good old Runescar Demon. Again, tutor on a stick, 7 mana, 6/6 flyer. But when it enters the battlefield, you search for a card, put it in your hand. So we do get some big flyers. And then we have last creature tutor, Razaketh, the Foul-Blooded. 8 mana for an 8/8 flying trample. And then you can pay 2 life and sacrifice another creature. Sorry. Search your library for a card and put it in your hand. Shuffle your library afterwards. So this can get you a bunch of tutors very quickly, depending on what you need. This may just end the game if he sticks around for any moment. Like, if you have any number of creatures other than him. And then the good old Imperial Seal. And again, this is one of those really expensive cards, I understand. And again, I've been playing for a very long time, and I happen to have the ability in my budget to get it. But this is by no means necessary for this deck to function. You can get away with something like Mastermind's Acquisition, for that matter, which actually was in this deck up until I got the Imperial Seal. So don't take it as I have to have that. Then we have Vampiric Tutor, 1 mana for an instant to search your library, and then you lose 2 life. And you put that card on top of your library, so you want to use this at the end of your opponent's turn, right before you start your turn, or if you have a draw engine going, you can use it then too. So, great way to help filter through your deck and find what you need, obviously. And then we have Entomb, which does exactly what we want it to do. 1 black, instant, shove a creature into our graveyard from our deck, and we like things in our graveyard. Let's say we go to activate Balthor, or somebody happens to play a Living End or something, and we just tutor up something and shove it into our yard real quick. Get what we need. And then we have good old Demonic Tutor. 2 mana, search your library for a card, put it in your hand. Shuffle your library. And then we have Diabolic Intent, the almost Diabolic Tutor, but not quite. Also just recently got reprinted also. 2 mana, sacrifice a creature in addition to paying its mana costs, and then you can search your library and put a card in your hand and shuffle your library afterwards. So basically the same thing, but you have to sacrifice a creature as well, which we don't mind sacrificing creatures. And then the last tutor we have is Buried Alive. 3 mana, search your library for 3 creatures and put them into your graveyard. Shuffle your library afterwards. Obviously, we like shoving things into our graveyard, so that's just a tutor 3 right there. And that sounds good to me. And then we have some of our recursion here. In addition to Balthor himself, we've got good old Gravecrawler, who says we can play him from our graveyard as long as we have a zombie. As you noticed, we have quite a few zombies, but Balthor himself also happens to be a zombie. So Gravecrawler can come back fairly easily And this, to be fair, this deck could easily become a zombie tribal if that's something you're interested in doing with it. There's quite a few zombies that could easily go into this deck that I did not include. And then we have Bloodghast, Vampire Spirit, 2/1 for 2 black, can't block. As long as your opponent has 10 or less life, he has haste. And then whenever you play a land, if he's in your graveyard, return him to the battlefield. Again, you could also do a vampire theme with this deck. There's actually quite a few vampires in the deck, including our win cons, including, I think, 2 or 3 vampires in there. But yeah, there's quite a few vampires in the deck, surprisingly, and quite a few other ones that I didn't include that could easily go into the deck. So another sub-theme that you could potentially do. Reassemble Skeleton is just really good. 2 mana for a 1/1, and you can pay 2 to put him from your graveyard onto the battlefield tapped. So it's just all-around good, easy recursion guy. Then I have Zhao Dun, the One-Eyed, 4 mana for a 2/2 with Horsemanship. And then you can sacrifice him to return target black card from your graveyard to your hand. You can activate this ability only as a sorcery before attackers are declared, is something else it says, but whatever. You're usually using him to pick up, whatever you need to pick up at the time, whether it be a damnation or whatever. But you don't have to have him in the deck. I know he's an expensive card, so I just happen to have one, and I really like what he does, and I really love his artwork. So then we have good old Necrotic Ooze, because if we can't necessarily recur our threats, or if somebody happens to kill Balthor before we get a chance to activate him, maybe we'll just play a Necrotic Ooze out and use the Ooze to activate, and then get Balthor back in addition to all our other stuff back. Or maybe we have Razakath in the graveyard. Because of Entomb, we play Necrotic Ooze, start sacrificing creatures to tutor up other cards. Sometimes, there's lots of things this guy can do. There's quite a few activated abilities in this deck, so don't underestimate him. And then we have good old Machias the Unhallowed, 6 mana for a 5/5 Intimidate. Whenever human deal damage to you, destroy it. Other non-human creatures you control get +1/+1 and have Undying. Now, something to point out, there are quite a few humans in this deck currently, but a lot of times you don't necessarily want to sack them for value until you're sacking everything so Balthor can reanimate it. So the things you're going to want to sacrifice for value are things like Grey Merchant of Asphodel, who happens to be a zombie, not a human. And Machias himself also happens to be a zombie for Gravecrawler. So these are the kind of things you just want to look out for, is just little interactions like that that just might not seem natural. Another card, Yawgmoth Will, lets you play any card out of your graveyard, but if any card goes to your graveyard during that turn, you exile it instead. Again, you don't have to have this. I realize it's a very expensive card. You can get away with something like, what's the new, or not new, I guess, but the wizard guy that, no, I can't think of the name. Magus of the Will, there we go. You can use him instead of Yawgmoth's Will if you have to, which there's nothing wrong with that. So Magus of the Will is just fine as well. But this lets you get any card back, not just creatures. So if something happens to be destroyed and you need it back, you can get it back. Then you have good old sack outlets. These are the remaining sack outlets that we haven't already covered. Obviously, we covered quite a few of them. But we have Viserys here and Carrion Feeder, just 2 of the most efficient sack outlets. They're 1 mana. They're free to sacrifice things. Viserys here lets you scry one, so if you get him early and you don't have anything going on really super awesome, you can start scrying to try and find something useful. And then Carrion Feeder just can't block and happens to get pretty big if you need him to. Not that you really need him to, but sometimes you can get on that aggro plan early. So it just depends how things go. And then our last category is our removal. And this is going to be more tailored to your own meta, your play group, whatever it is that you need. It's not necessarily going to be these cards. So, Withered Wretch, just some more graveyard hate, because, again, Balthor does reanimate everybody's graveyard, so sometimes you're going to want to be able to pick out certain creatures from your opponent's graveyard before they come back and can cause you problems. Sometimes you just want to screw over a Snapcaster Mage or something like that, too. So, he's just really good. And he also happens to be a zombie. So then we have Orc Sure Shot, 4 mana for a 4/2 Orc Archer. But whenever another creature enters the battlefield, you can under your control, target creature an opponent controls gets -1/-1 until end of turn. Well, again, we're doing mass reanimation strategy, so this guy is going to give a lot of negatives all over the place, and you can easily wipe an opponent's board out with this. Then we have Phyrexian Plague Lord. We do like to sacrifice our creatures, and he lets us sacrifice them for -1/-1 until end of turn on a target creature. Or he can sacrifice himself when he taps to do -4/-4. So he himself is removal, and then he also turns all of your other creatures into removal as well. So he's a really good card. He's a sack outlet and removal all in one. So couldn't really ask for more. And then we have Archfiend at Ifnir, 5 mana for a 5/4 flying demon. But whenever you cycle or discard a card, put a -1/-1 counter on each creature your opponent's control. And then he also has cycling, so he can shove himself into the graveyard, which is nice, and draw you another card. And then Balthor can reanimate him. And then as you discard cards with, your other stuff that you have that discards, whether it's due to hand size or the imp to generate some mana, he'll start wiping your opponent's boards out. So, good card. Then we have good old Damnation, 4 mana, destroy all creatures that can't be regenerated. Sometimes you just got a board wipe. And then we have a Toxic Deluge. It's 3 mana, pay life in addition to its casting, and then all creatures get -X until end of turn, which is the number of life you paid, obviously. So, anyway, let's bring back some of these cards real quick and talk about the engine and how it works. All right. So, these are the kind of cards you want to kind of chain together. You want to have a win con, which would be Gary in this case, a mana generation, which is the Scourge Familiar, allows you to discard cards, or you could even have Pale of Splendor or Pawn of Villamog. And then you want to have a draw engine, which is in this case Grim Haruspex, and you want to have a sack outlet, which in this case is a Phyrexian Altar. But basically, this is how the deck works. You're going to sacrifice your creatures, generate mana with the Phyrexian Altar. Every creature you sacrifice generates you a mana, or generates you a card with Grim Haruspex. That card is then turned into mana with the Scourge Familiar. And then when you replay Balthor and activate him, all those cards you discarded, a lot of them are going to be creatures. So you're actually going to net mana, and you're going to be able to generate more and more and more. And you're going to be able to dig through your entire deck very quickly and literally win by activating Balthor 3-4 times in a turn. And if Gary is there, he'll just drain your opponents every time he comes in. Or you have Zulaport Cutthroat or whatever. Every time you sacrifice a creature, you drain your opponent. That's what this deck is designed to do. This is what you're going to do to win. And a lot of times, the way that I currently have him set up, I've been able to go off as early as turn 3. Consistently, I go off on turn 5. And on a slow hand, I'll go off on turn 7. So it's very quick. It's very surprising. And a lot of people do not see it coming. Because you can play this defensively as well. It does have enough removal. It does have enough mana generation. You can start hard casting 8 drops by turn 3-4 if you're lucky. So it doesn't necessarily do everything the best, but it is a lot of fun, and I highly recommend the Little Dwarf Balthor the Defiled. If you haven't looked into a deck like this, he's a lot of fun. Again, there are a lot of ways to build this deck. There happen to be currently a lot of zombies, a lot of vampires, a lot of demons, a good chunk of humans, and quite a few wizards. already in the deck, and it could easily be customized to be any of those, sort of a tribal deck if you wanted to, or you could continue with this reanimation strategy that it has for a mass reanimation strategy. That's the main difference between Balthor and like somebody like Chainer. Chainer reanimates one creature at a time. Shield reanimates one creature at a time. Balthor just says they're all coming back right now. So it allows you to play a lot differently than those decks would. Um, I used to run Torment of Hailfire in here as well, and at one point I Tormented Hailfire for like 53 on like turn 4. I kind of took it out of the deck after that because I really felt bad for ending the game that early with a Torment of Hailfire. So it's a very fast deck, but I hope you guys enjoyed, and we'll catch you next time.